And by that, I'll ask you to stay on the stage, and I'll call up for the next panel, which is being hosted by my colleague, Johan Lindell. He's the head of research policy at the Swedish Research Council, and he will be the host for this coming panel, which Jean-Claude Burgelman will be part of, as well as Jonas Björk, who is the Director General, the Division of Research Policy at Ministry of Education and Research, and Sigrid Tollefsen, the Senior Advisor, the Ministry of Education and Research in Norway. So please, Johan, take it away.
Thank you, Sophie. I think you should be over here, Jean-Claude. You should have your there. Very interesting presentation, a lot of questions, and I know that you will all have your Mentimeters and sending in the questions, so we will pick them up later to hopefully have all the answers on the questions from Jean-Claude. But I would like to start with some questions about what's happening now on the Nordic level and in our different Nordic countries on the political level. And I would like to pose the first question to you, Sigrid.
Yes.
What's happening in Norway? What is being discussed at the ministry? What's going on? What you're talking about in Kunskapsdepartementet?
Yes. When I saw the question recently or yesterday, my first immediate response would be, we talk about Plan S in the ministry, in the research community. But of course, we talk about a lot of other issues as well. We have recently developed several policy documents from the ministry that give directions for further work on open science and digitization. And first of all, I'd like to emphasize the revised long-term plan for higher education and research that the government launched just last month in October. And this is the second long-term plan, or it's a revision of the first one. Describes that Norway is addressing open science through both open access to data and open access to research publications, and also open innovation. And the long-term plan also describes that we need to support the industry more with quality education, and also supporting the technologies. So we are working on a long-term on those questions. And also, since Norway, we are a small Nordic country, we like to say that we have been cautious front runners in the open access world since we adopted the first national policy in 2005. But it was last year that we really sort of speeded up the process. We have national goals and guidelines for open access to research articles that we launched in August last year. And just before Christmas, just a year ago, we also had the national strategy on access to and sharing of data, picking up many of the points that you pointed out in your previous speech. And also the goals and the guidelines for access to research publications, that we had the goal that it should be available by 2024, because we thought that 2020 would be very quick. But then we had Plan S, and we are supporting that as well. We also, I'd like to say that in the Ministry of Education and Research, we think that we have good organizations working to implement the policy that we have. We are very happy that the Research Council of Norway works so strongly with infrastructure and also publications. And the new organization that we created or merged by 1st of January 2018, the new Directorate for ICT and Joint Services in Higher Education and Research, they merged the data, libraries, working with consortia agreements, all kinds of different important issues for us. And they are also responsible for national coordination and in the ICT world. And all those, and of course, we have the National Center for Research Data. So we think we have strong organizations also implementing the national policy. That was my first introduction.
Thank you, Sigrid. Sounds very interesting. A lot of things going on there. So now I wonder what is happening in our own ministry. Yeah. Jonas, would you like to tell us about what are your ideas and plans?
Thank you, Johan. It's great to be in a political panel. I'm glad that the State Secretary left before I started to speak, but thank you anyway. Well, in Sweden, I would say that at the policy level, we are beyond discussing why open access, and Jean-Claude has given us the history and the paradigm shift that we have discovered. So we are really focused on how open access is going to be implemented and how we can speed up the process, because I think you said that Carlos Moeller thinks it goes too slow, and we think also we need to speed up the process. And the recent government actions that has been taken to achieve this has been that, first of all, we had a research policy bill that came 2016. It was called Knowledge for Collaboration. And then we set the national target that all scientific publications resulting from publicly funded research should be made available immediately upon publication. And the transition to open science system through open access to publications and research data should be completed no later than within 10 years. And that was exactly what the State Secretary also said. It's a bold goal, but we hope to reach it, of course. And it's time to move fast to reach that goal. We have also, the government has also decided on a lot of assignments and other things. For example, this year we have changed the instruction to the National Library. It has been changed, and one of the tasks that is given to them is that the library shall provide a sound and comprehensive data source for the evaluation of Swedish scientific publications, and it's at the SwedPub database. And like you said, it's important to have a source where you can follow everything that is produced in a country, that also you can use indicators to measure the development of open access and other things that's happening in the country. We have also, the government has decided on an assignment to the National Library to develop criteria to assess the extent to which scientific publications wholly or permanently generated by public funding comply with the FAIR principles. And the criteria should enable an assessment of whether scientific publications meet the national objective of being openly available immediately upon publication. So this is really also important to measure the development, and this assignment is going to be reported to the government in February next year. So this will be an important report that we then have to consider how we should move forward. And we also have a corresponding assignment to the Swedish Research Council when it comes to develop criteria to assess the extent to which research data, and then again, wholly or partly generated by public funding, meets these FAIR principles. And this assignment is going to be reported a bit earlier, already in December. And talking about measuring things, we have also given the National Library to compile the total expenditure for scientific publications for university and university colleges in Sweden annually. So it's important to follow the costs for publications in Sweden. So that are examples of the policy measures that we have been taking in Sweden.
Thank you, Jonas. And I'm very glad to hear that you rely so much on us authorities in producing the politics of open science and our reporting. But I was just thinking about Jean-Claude. Now you had two of the Nordic countries, one EU country, one non-EU. What do you hear? Are we on the way to the Bucharest Declaration? Or are they on the right track?
Yeah, sure. But what I... No.
That's what I wanted to hear.
Let's close the conference. But no, I think it's indeed what has happened the last 2 to 3 years is quite remarkable, and that's not because the Commission did this, but it's because suddenly, I think what we did was pick up what was in the air and translate it into a generic approach. But in the meantime, you see many member states going ahead very fast, and I think most of the Scandinavian countries, because we have spies everywhere. You have a good ex-colleague, next team guy of mine works for CESA, by the way. And so we know more or less what is going on in your country, and it is really interesting. But so in that respect, I think you're moving ahead very fast. Where I do think what we should not underestimate is that I think the battle of open access of publications, that's over. I mean, for me, it's almost trivial in the totality of what open science is all about, because it is only the end of the life cycle of research. Now, what is much more important, and where I still think we need a lot of work to do, and there again it varies according to the countries, but I would say also here is on the open data and the fairness. It's relatively easy to say it has to be fair. It's not so easy to do it, and you need to gear the whole educational system towards it and train your funders. If we are far from the Bucharest Declaration, I think yes and no. No, because we all know we have to do something. If we really want to speed it up, and the last element of the chain is incentivize it, we know it. That I think the whole of Europe agrees on, and probably here more. But will we agree on it? That's something different, because you need the universities and the funders to agree on it. You cannot mandate it as a public service. So, and universities, as we know, are quite autonomous in these things, and we have 3,000 of them more or less in higher education. So that I think it is relatively easy to do, because you just need to agree on a few indicators. But if we will get there, I think we will need a bit of groundwork as well. Because don't forget, you also need the scientists to be on board there. They have to see the benefit. We can invent whatever system, but if they don't see the benefit, what's the point?
Yes, very important thing. I'm also thinking that we're talking very much about it as it's something only happening in Europe. What about US, Asia? How should we think about it on a global scale?
I think it became a global discussion, to be honest. So there are science clouds, they call it differently. There is one now in Australia up and running. The Canadians are busy with one, the Japanese are doing something, the NIH, NSF does it the American way, because that is of course always different. In China, as I said over lunch, so I read a report on what China is doing on open data. It's pushing ahead very, very hard. So it is becoming global. Why? Because science is global. Why? Because this is simply the nature. It's like e-commerce. Why would you not have a global e-commerce? Doesn't make sense that you're lagging behind in part X of the world, because e-commerce simply is the new way to do commerce. Well, this is the same. Open science is the new way to do science across the globe. So it becomes very quickly a global discussion. So with the Commission and so as representing the member states, we try to push the discussion in the G7. We also try to do it in the OECD. But there are also indicators that the United Nations might pick it up as trying to develop a global platform. That would make a lot of sense. So it is there.
Yeah, it's a political issue all over the globe. I was just also thinking about the challenges and opportunities from a political view. I would like to start with you again, Sigrid. What is your view on it? The open science, are there any challenges, or are they just opportunities?
Of course, there are always challenges, but we think they are possible to sort of meet them or work along to meet them. First of all, I'd also like to agree on the need to work on the data issue, because the national strategy that we launched last year also emphasizes both the FAIR principles, open as possible, close as necessary. But we have also emphasized the management and curation of data. But we have said that the decisions concerning archiving and management of the research data should be taken within the research community. So that's sort of the lines that we work on, and so it's in the beginning. But we know also that the universities and the communities are working that. So I think the challenge is to make sort of agree on the standards, which standards to use, and to making the principles sort of work. there are many different challenges. We have to sort of, we cannot solve everything at once, so we have to sort of divide them in different perspectives. Also, I think your list with the different kinds of questions, metrics, or So we have to dig into the different challenges and find solutions and build sort of step by step. Also, another thing that we do in Norway when it comes to data is that the government has launched the initiative of a health analysis platform, which is very interesting, trying to work on publicly data, and also making that kind of data available to the researchers, but also to the other community in a different way. So we're also building that step by step. So that's another way of working on publicly funded data, which we find very important and interesting. That's another directorate under the Ministry of Education, of Health, working on that issue.
That's interesting. There are things that are challenging also. Do you share, Jonas, do you share our view on this? Is it the same in Sweden? Do you see the same challenges, or do you see others?
Well, like I started, I think that there's a strong policy push to open science system in Europe, and like Jean-Claude mentioned, that this was already announced a long time ago by the Commission, and there were some Council conclusions in 2016. So all the member states and associated countries like Norway are focusing now on how are we going to implement this and how fast should we move. So that is really the policy push. And as a consequence of the discussion on the policy level, member states are focused on this and have to think about how we should speed up the process. You mentioned the Plan S. There is one policy measure that has been debated, whether it's going too fast or not. But that's one measure that has been one initiative that is taken by the Commission. When I also had to think about that open science is one of several solutions to political and societal challenges, and it's very tightly connected to the digitalization of the society. And there are so many other initiatives, not at least on the EU level, that connects to this and are very important. You mentioned the European Open Science Cloud. We have also the European High-Performance Computing Initiatives. And now the latest one is the Cybersecurity Center that it's coming up very strongly. So these are all interrelated and important things for the policy level to address. And of course, scientific knowledge is the essence of our society's development, but it's not. But not if it's withheld from those who paid for it, and that is really the taxpayers. So they have the right sort of to the knowledge and to get this information. But open access to publication and data is also a prerequisite for open science system that also includes, like you have mentioned also, Jean-Claude, open educational resources, open source, citizen science, like you mentioned, but also new ways of evaluating research activities in a digital and in an open way. So we must think about that. But open science also means increased cooperation between several parts in the research process. And that includes, of course, researchers, but also between researchers and the general public. And open science also contributes to discover weaknesses and also fraud, which is very much debated nowadays, and can help to foster reward strength also if it's done in the right way. So I would say that open science has an impact on the potential of all scientific areas to reach higher quality, stronger impact, and the opportunity for more citizens to make innovations. And that is one of Carlos Moeda's important things also, I think. And thus increase the competitiveness for nations as well as to address societal challenges. And that is not at least important on the EU level.
Thank you, Jonas. I'm just thinking, Jean-Claude, now, when you listen to what you're saying now about opportunities and challenges, are there other challenges? I mean, we're talking very much about things that needs to be done on a more of a technical, but are there other issues also? I'm thinking about sometimes it's brought up the role of integrity from the researcher side. Are there those kind of challenges in the open science concept also, and how would you handle them?
Well, I think that what we can foresee as challenges are more or less known. We need to develop some data integrity framework. Remember Cambridge Analytics, that kind of stuff. We need to invest heavily in data stewardship in Europe and rethink or reinvent our library schools, but that's maybe not the library school, but anyway, you see what I mean. We need to work on standardizing data skills across the board. I think that data science, but not defined as computer science, but defined as in the way we want here, should become standard for all master and PhD students, just like, and even at bachelor level, just like statistics became standard. It's a tool that you will need. Visualizing data will be a tool as important as statistics in the future. So these are short-term challenges, I would say. We all know, and that require a significant policy, because if we wait until it spontaneously happens, it will happen in a few, very few, because they have the resource and the rest will lag behind. So if we really want to generalize it, then I think we need to coordinate our policy. But we should also have an open mind, you know. Many times when we discuss this, I have flashbacks when I was a doctoral student, and I was first-year doctoral student when the computer was introduced. I don't know if you remember that, but before a smartphone, there was another machine. And these were the same kind of discussions. You know, I remember faculties, we refuse the computer, we take a pen, you know, and then after a while, okay, we do it, but we take this kind of standard. Then came MS-DOS, then became email, and so forth. And after 10 years, well, everyone accepted it. How did we live without it? But then became other things, you know, then came other problems. So we should keep an open mind there because the introduction of the computer has changed teaching, it has changed research, and open science and data science will do it to another level. So we must design frameworks which are open and flexible, and that is probably, I think, policy-wise, on top of the immediate challenges, the biggest challenge. And then finally, we have to get, as I said, there are 2 million researchers in Europe. We have to get them on board in some way or another, and to be honest, we know that researchers are extremely progressive in ideas and relatively conservative as an institution. So that I think is not so easy to tackle.
So when we are looking forward to a more open science, we also need an open mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I have a question to you, all of you. I would like you to bring out your phones now and the Mentimeter. And I would like you to think about this question now, and I would like you to respond with one word. And the question is, what are the public benefits of open science? A key word to describe it. Could it be democracy or threat, or what could it be? So if you type it down, it will come up here. Trust coming up. Democracy is coming up. Let's fill the screen. And then I would like you to reflect on what you will see on the screen. Are they just 2 words? You need to keep the open mind because it shifts all the time. Do we have a result? Yes, no, almost. I think we're going to start with some reflections. Who would like to start?
Jonas.
Jonas would like to start.
Oh, thank you.
Congratulations, Jonas.
Thank you. Well, I can see that...
you have it on your screen here also if you...
Oh, sorry about that. But I'm speaking in a microphone, so I can...
Oh.
No, but I can see that some of the words that was brought up at the State Secretary from a sort of democratic perspective are coming up very good here, like trust, transparency, knowledge sharing. So it is... this is a sort of... The benefits are on a very high level. It's a benefit for the society. It's a benefit for everybody that we transform to this open science system, I would say. And it comes out very good here.
Sigrid, what are your reflections?
Oh, it's interesting. It reflects many of the same sort of associations that we share in Norway as well. I think the open innovation idea and the transparency is very important because it gives increased credibility to the research towards the society, and it also speaks for better economic growth in the societies. And also the sharing and the sustainability, reproducibility, that you can reproduce data, information is important. And the citizen science initiative, I think that's embedded in the transparency and the democracy perspective in a very good way.
Yeah, maybe sharing also. Yeah. Jean-Claude, what are your reflections?
Well, I have two reflections. First of all, this is a nice example of data visualization. How you can very quickly, how you can very quickly, if you have to do this in an Excel sheet, you're lost. I mean, before you get to the end of the Excel sheet, people lose attention. But this is, and I think this can happen to very large scale sets of data as well. No, but I think my personal comment is the following. I think all these elements were in the science system somewhere. It's not so that from 2016 onwards, to put it stupidly, when we decided in the council to go for it, that from then onwards the science system is transparent and so forth. It was there, but let's say incremental or not very well developed. Well, in my view, the big public benefit for open science that it allows the science system to deliver all this in a much more mature and a much more satisfying way than it ever was possible. And that citizen science is an example. There was always citizen science for the last 30, 40 years, but now it can be done at a very large scale and very professionally. That's the big difference. So it is not a disruption whereby you have 1 and 0. It is you go in a line, but the growth is exponential of the potential. And I think that would be my comment on this answer.
You have future there. That's a key word also.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting that the transparency is key because indeed a lot of people are also doubting science. And well, if you don't trust it, well, look at the data, look at the software, but also the software. Otherwise, you can't make sense out of it. And then, at least from a public point of view, the public system invested so much. Well, books on the table, you can check it. So that's a key achievement, of course.
Thank you. And thank you. Very interesting. It looks like almost like a painting. I wonder if we can have a printout of it. I have another question for you. One of the themes of this conference is incentives. What incentives are needed to engage scientists to openly share the research? What are the challenges and opportunities in this field? Should we... I look at Sigrid, you look eager now. Please.
Yeah, first of all, also I'd like to... I see that this is a discussion afterwards also, so I'm very interested in looking
the next panel, yes.
at the next discussion. Yeah, but for our perspective, also we would like to say that incentives are more than economic rewards. It's very important that when it comes to sharing and research data, the field is still developing. So we think we need a change of culture in order to share. And also, for us, very important is that we give greater recognition to credit to data management and curating activities. So that's sort of at the top of our list. But we can work on making data sets more citable, work with the research data more visible by using the different identifiers that we have on the different standards. But we also know that all the supporting services that are needed is very important in order to make this happen. So information, training, and also that we have a good dialogue with the research institutes, that they develop procedures for approving the data management plans and sort of have the good dialogue with the actual performing research institutions and researchers. And there we think the research councils are very sort of also important instruments in that
in order to have the dialogue.
Yeah. Also, we think we need to share information and common goals, especially because publications, as you said, that's sort of history, but we are very much also living in the challenges of that as well. So we need to seek more transparency and share information on those questions, we think. And good dialogue with the research community. That has always been a very important issue for us. I think in all countries, of course, but in Norway we also have a strong tradition of working together with the community and universities on developing the policy, because what we see is that the Plan S will have to we have to look into for instance, in our country, we have a publication indicator that we have to look into how that would be affected as a result of Plan S. We have to have good dialogue with the institutions on that as well.
Yeah, thank you. Jean-Claude, what do you say? What incentives are needed?
Well, I think for us, and also my personal view, is that we should concentrate on the incentives which are related to the researcher. And for a researcher, there are basically two big incentives besides the fact that he does discoveries, he can contribute and so forth. But that you can quantify, by the way, into an indicator which can become an incentive. So I think incentives should be geared towards how will it help me finding a job and making a career in that job, which is a better way than it was in the past, which was determined by one indicator. To be honest, in the end, it's always the high impact or the general impact factor type of stuff that determines the evaluation. And then secondly, how will it allow me to get more funding? Now, if you build into your funding criteria and in your job specifications, career track specification, if you build in parameters that are more open science, like data sharing in fair repositories is one indicator, boom, you get a plus, then you have created a huge incentive. But there is also an element I think we have to bear in mind there, that we also have to, I think in our work in evangelizing this, we have to explain why it is not a material effect only, it is also because it helps progressing science. And the example I often use there is open peer review. Open peer review started open in the old days, and then it got closed for many reasons, and now you can be a fantastic peer reviewer and no one sees it. Now, if you make the peer review process openly and you sign it, meaning you can, if you want it, if you don't want it, you don't do it. You can quantify your number of contributions. That's an indicator. But it also recreates what actually science was always, dialogue. So you make actually the discussion on the product, on the process of an article visible. So the incentive is not only, I'm a very good peer reviewer, look, I was asked so many times and my articles were so many times published. There is plenty of software now to measure, to follow that, but it also recreates a richer science, because a lot of, we know that the end product is not always the best part of the article, so a lot of the discussion in between is maybe as interesting as the end product. So that is the kind of discourse we need to build. You know, it's not only you have to get your points, your air miles, and then you get your tenure. It is much more than that. It allows also for you as a scientist to be a better scientist. Or a richer scientist, intellectually.
Thank you. Jonas, now,
well,
what do you say?
It's obvious that the scientists are the important part of the solution to reach an open science system, of course. And with that comes also a responsibility, I think, for the scientific community to reflect on how they merit and value scientific quality. And there has been a strong focus on different types of bibliometrics and which relates to journal impact factors and other things. And maybe the shift has to go to look at the content and quality of the individual scientific output more. And of course, incentives for researchers are important, and universities and funders then needs to encourage, value and support researchers so they choose to publish their quality assured research results open to be read by all and downloaded and reused. But there is still, I don't think it's a proven model for how this is going to be best done in a way, so that this needs to be developed. But I don't think that policymakers, for example, can or should prescribe how to develop ways to merit science that contribute to the open science system. This must come from the scientific community itself.
Well, sorry if I... But exactly, I mean, it's not up to us. It's up to us to facilitate it, and then universities and funders have to agree, because otherwise it's not. I mean, but it will not happen spontaneously. I mean, the high impact factor was not invented spontaneously. Yeah?
It's interesting. You all three of you share very much the same view on the way forward and what incentives are needed. And one central issue is the importance of the dialogue. It's going to be interesting now in the next panel, because then we're going to have researchers discussing this and seeing if they're going to share your view or not. So something that will be after the break. So the idea is now to have some questions. Helena.
Well, I have to thank you for being so active. Actually, I hope you have the time to stay, because so far we have received about 50, 60 questions. So, thank you for that. I'll start with a question, I think, for Mr. Burgelman. Did I understand correctly that the Commission is advocating the use of impact factor as a measure of quality? And if I did, are you sure about that?
Well, the Commission is agnostic, so we outsource evaluation to the people in the room here, so to the scientists, and they determine the way these evaluations are done. And by coincidence, quite often they fall back on high impact factor, because if you have 136 dossiers, how are you going to in let's say 1 day and so forth? So that's how it comes. No, we are not advocating it. What we are advocating, what I wanted to say, is we're trying to advocate a system whereby you have that plus a series of other indicators.
And here's another question. The current metrics rewarding researchers for publishing in high-impact journals means that the system works against open science. What is done to put pressure on governments, funders, and universities to use Altmetrics instead?
That's for you and us.
I don't think there's a policy push right now to use Altmetrics, but these assignments that I was talking about earlier, of course, from our authorities, the National Library and the Swedish Research Council, will, of course, contribute to this. And I think we have to reconsider how we are going to measure that in the future. But right now, there's no prescription on how that is going to be done.
That we do not either have a sort of specific policy towards Altmetrics, but as I said, we are working on how to look into the publication indicator that is the metrics system that we use in Norway for a very small percentage of the financing of the universities. But we also support the DORA declaration in Norway, and it's also stated in the Norwegian guidelines and goals. So that's also something that initiative that our minister is strongly holding up to. So we are looking into different ways, and that's very important for us as well. But we think that the data that we have on all the publications and articles and research information and results that are produced, we have to sort of find a way of keeping that valuable and good information and a good quality. So that's also important. So that's why we want to go into dialogue with the research community on sort of trying to solve both questions. Yeah.
And here's another one. I worked really hard to collect my data, and I'm going to analyze it for years to come. Why should I give it away?
Because
who would like Jonas?
Well, if it's funded by governmental money, of course, and the governmental money goes to a university, the things that you produce, it's a sort of a common goods that is going to be available, must be available to the taxpayers, of course, and after you have finished your study and published your results. So it's in a way not your data in that sense.
I think this will be a good input to the next panel discussion after the coffee break.
I think you, Jean-Claude, also want to say.
Yeah, because I think this is the wrong way of looking at it. Because imagine that you have a generalized system of open data. Then I also have the benefits of others' data. The point is, of course, and that's the discussion in the cloud, if we in Europe make our data openly available and the rest of the world not, can they then tap into it? Of course not. There will be reciprocity, but it also plays at an individual level. It's always the problem is it's a systemic change, so it has to massively change at the same time. If only a few universities would make their data mandatory, open, available, and the rest not, then you create a parasitic system. But if all of us, if all the universities decide to do so, then it is to the benefit of everyone, and it will allow you much faster science. I mean, my PhD, I spent 2 bloody years on this empirical data, and I could, if they would have been openly available in a digital format now, I could have done it in 3 months, and concentrate on thinking and not on compiling bloody data, you know. And that's not. No, but let's say that's the reason. So if it is much easier, it makes life much more fun, I would say, scientific life, at least.
So let's move on from the bloody data to another question.
Let's move on to Nobel. Nice advocacy of teamwork. Since we're here in Stockholm, would you encourage the Nobel committees to start making awards to whole teams instead of just picking, let's say, max 3 at the top?
Well, we don't steal the Nobel Prize committees in the first place. I don't know if we can say anything about that.
But
that was a very diplomatic answer.
You passed that one, okay. Do you think the Open Science initiatives will affect the big problematic publishers? If so, when and how?
Will you answer?
Jean-Claude, you want to start?
So the Nobel Prize, by the way, I think it should go to teams. This being said, I think in the 19th century, science was the brilliant individual. In the 20th century, the brilliant team, and now it's the brilliant network. But okay, this aside. Well, of course, it will affect the publishers, and it is affecting them. And you get on 2 levels. Look at the strategy of the publishers, what they do. It's really interesting to look at what the big players do, but it's also very interesting to look at what the newcomers are doing. You have much more competition at that level, at least, than before. You have a lot of interesting startups in the publishing world as before, because the technologies allow you, which doesn't mean that the end game will be as rich as it is now. But that's another story. But for the moment, it is affecting deeply the publishers. Some of them are reorienting their strategy to knowledge companies, or as they label themselves. Others are label themselves as open science platforms. So you see it happening on the ground. And this was an example from a major player and a minor player.
Sigrid or Jonas?
I can only agree. Of course, it will affect the publishers, but we hope that it will affect them in a positive way. We don't want to get rid of them, of course. We just want them to be more open-minded and price their products reasonably, because so we can have a sort of a good variety of different publication platforms. So, but yes, we hope it will affect the publishers, but in a good way. And we also need to keep the dialogue with the publishing industry. That's another dialogue we need to keep. Yeah.
Indeed.
If the process, the research process, is changed towards an open science system, of course, the publishers will also adapt to that. We all know that from the policy level, with different initiatives, we are trying to make publishers also to change business models to adapt to this new landscape of publishing with open access.
I can expect the next question. Plan S included an offer to the publishers to collaborate. How is that going?
Take it once again.
Yeah.
Plan S included an offer to the publishers to collaborate. How is that going?
Yeah, I think.
I don't know how it's going.
Can you please?
We're relying on you now, Jean-Claude. Tell us now.
Do you prefer the Nobel question?
First of all, so I lost my microphone. No, Plan S is an initiative of the funders, not of the Commission. So it's an initiative of Science Europe, and formally there is a working group now within Science Europe where we participate as Commission, as funder, not as policymaker. Quite important. So we participate in how to implement Plan S. And the invitation you mentioned is, of course, up to Science Europe. That was mentioned in the question. It's up to Science Europe to play, but to answer. Now, it is, in my personal mind, it is quite logically that at some point in time we need to sit around the table, all of us, because and I am quite sure that, and I know that behind, well, there are a lot of bilaterals going on, but I don't think there is a structural dialogue. But of course, there is lots of discussions at every possible level with the publishers. And my experience is that they take it as serious as the researchers take it, and that they are and serious in a positive way. So not we're going to block everything and so on. So I think I'm quite optimistic we will get to a nice agreement. But that is my personal view.
Sigrid?
Yeah, I just want to add that I think it's very important that we work on sort of stimulating the journals to flip, to be open, and supporting them in a way. So we really hope that Plan S would sort of be able to shift and encourage that dialogue. And just we've done very small things in Norway because we don't have many big publishers. But from the Norwegian Humanities and Social Sciences journals, we have from last year supported them to be open, and that was quite a discussion and dialogue with them. But we added a small funding from the government, and then there was enough money in the system to shift them, so they are now open. And that's just a very small example from a small country, but it has impact, and we could do something. But from in the discussion with the large publishers, we need to have a coordinated dialogue together. Yeah.
Should we let Jonas go first, and then you will have a...
We also have, of course, examples from Sweden when the policy level and the universities and university libraries in consortia, of course, challenge some of the big publishers. And that is not only happening in Sweden. There is also a way of affecting the system, the publishing system, or the business models.
And you noticed that in Norway they had extra funding from the government?
Not much. We used the existing, and it's not going to last.
No, I think also what is also important. I think what is important about Plan S is the political signal that it gives, but also increasingly people start to realize that publications is part of a larger market of supply and demand of knowledge. That can be publications, it can be data, and so on. So I think we should, in due course, focus in Europe, how are we going to regulate that? Because it's a market problem. And you cannot correct with research funding market issues. And that is really, I think that is really essential, that we sit together at some point in time, I don't know how and under which constellation, that we sit together and say, okay, in this explosion of potential of knowledge, access and equitable access will be very important. So there must be somewhere, we must find somewhere a mechanism to regulate that. And it is possible. We did it in telecommunications, so we can as well do it probably in the science industry. So Plan S will be, the ambitions of Plan S should be the ambitions of the whole knowledge industry. And then it becomes really a kind of a package view that we need to develop.
And it needs to be done before 1st of January 2020.
Yes.
I answered that one, okay, thank you.
That little part.
Yeah, that small part, yes. Another question.
Do you think we have time for about 2 questions more? What is your take on GDPR, a facilitator or a barrier to open access, to open science practices?
Can you repeat?
What is your take on GDPR, a facilitator or a barrier to open science practices?
Sigrid.
It's both, of course. It's a barrier when it has to be a barrier, but it's facilitating when needed to. We need we have a sort of from the policy point of view, we have a good way into it. It's not black and white. It's good that we protect personal data that should not sensitive data, but we have in the health analysis platform that I mentioned earlier, the GDPR will be built in and giving stronger and stronger protection according to which data that needs protection. And that will be sort of a very good way of implementing the GDPR. So it's not black and white.
You want to say, Jonas?
Well, I think GDPR protects the citizen in different ways. That is very good. But of course, we have to have a complementary legislation on the national level, and that is what we have. We have a general act in Sweden, but we also have parts of that act that is connected to research. With that, I think we take care of that in Sweden, at least.
I agree completely. I think GDPR is the European condition for open access. We agree with open access, but we also want GDPR because we find it important, as you said. And I think it has an enormous opportunity for our data scientists to come up with GDPR-specific solutions to big data. What I want to say there is that the old model is you pump up all your data into a server, you do your crunching, and you pump it back. Now, GDPR makes it quasi-impossible to do that, which means that we need to find for software that does the opposite. And they do it in the health sector, by the way. So there's this famous pilots running in Holland, in the Netherlands, sorry. So the personal health train, whereby the data stay with me on my phone, and the software that you want, the data crunching that you want to do is traveling across the phones. So you no longer centralize it and you make it de-anonymize it, otherwise it doesn't make sense, you do the opposite. That means that we have to develop this kind of software industry, and that's a huge opportunity. So it can even be an data industrial advantage for us, the GDPR. And once again, I mean, 2 weeks ago we were for big discussions in the US. Most of the US, even the techie community, thinks that GDPR should become the standard view. What has happened the last 3 to 5 years in data scandals, so to speak.
Okay, I have a last question for you before Johan rounds up the discussion. I think this one is really good. I'm 10 years old, wanting to become a scientist when I grow up. How would you, in 1 or 2 sentences, explain the benefits of open science to me?
That was an easy one. Jonas.
I realized why I didn't come politician.
I don't know how many of you have children at home or grandchildren.
No, but I would say that open science system contributes to the development of the society, and in the future we will have new innovative medicines or ways of addressing climate change and things that really can tackle the challenges that we face. So I think open science will speed up that process and will create a brighter future for you as a young kid. Something like that.
Okay, more than 2 sentences, but thanks.
Sigrid?
Yeah, I agree. I think being a researcher is important, and I think the open research will be sort of the standard. So the question is, why should I be a researcher when you grow up? And I think they should be a researcher because they can contribute to developing the society and all the issues Jonas mentioned. So that meaning, I think open science is goes without saying when my 10-year-old grows up.
Well, I would say 2 things. So first of all, I would say probably to my 10-year kid, I mean, open science simply is science, so I would start about the benefits of science. And my second thing would be, well, what do they learn you in school, you know? What do they teach you at school? So ask your teacher.
Okay, thanks for now. Over to you, Johan.
Thank you very much. I have one last question to the 3 of you. And in your presentation, Jean-Claude, you were mentioning in the more of a future, long term, we brought another perspective in regards of future. But if you look, for example, for 10 years, what kind of development would you see? What are the potentials? And also, since this is a Nordic conference, I would also like, especially Jonas and Sigrid, to think about what kind of Nordic cooperation could we have in this field. So if you look ahead, and I would like Jonas to start, then we have Sigrid, because you were bringing it up in your presentation, then I would like you, Jean-Claude, to reflect on what you're hearing from these 2 colleagues. So, Jonas, what do you think about the future?
Well, if we start in the Nordic end, I mean, even though Norway is not an EU country, it is an associated country, and we work on this in the EU context with the member states and the associated countries. So I think the policy framework, we are working in the same policy framework, so that it's important to work together, both on a Nordic and in European context. And of course, as Nordic neighbors, we always look at each other and who is going first, and so we always inspire each other. So that is very good.
Norway is always first.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially in skiing.
Denmark, when it comes to science. Yeah, exactly. But I can mention other fields of sports, but I won't. But looking into the future, I think the policy push will remain strong and accelerate this development. I'm pretty sure about that. And I hope that the transformation of talking about the current publishing system is completed in a couple of years, so at least if you have this 10 years perspective. So the subscription business model is replaced by a new model that ensures outputs and open and reusable, and that the costs behind this dissemination are transparent, talking about transparency and economically sustainable, because now these costs are skyrocketing, and that is not good for the government. But I also hope that all research data, of course, are complied with these FAIR principles that we were talking so much about today. And I hope that this fantastic pan-European federation that Jean-Claude is working with, the European Open Science Cloud, is up and riding and providing us with access to a wide range of publicly funded services that we can use both at the national and regional and institutional level. And going for the big things to the small things, I hope the data management plans become a standard scientific practice very soon, both in Sweden and other countries. And I heard Sven said when relevant, but that's good, because they are important. It's because when you have a data management plan, you think about what you are going to do with your data in an early stage of the research process. And if you are going to disseminate, explore, how you will use your data. So I think that is very crucial to make everybody think about research data and talking about private integrity and intellectual property right, I think, as you also mentioned, Jean-Claude, that research data should be as open as possible, as closed as necessary.
Thank you. Sigrid.
Yeah, good reflections from Sweden here. What I would like to say is that I hope that the trust in science is preserved in 10 years due to the open science, that will contribute to that we still keep believing that science is a good and reliable source of information that we need. And I support your sort of initiatives as well. We think also we need to work more collectively, both in the Nordic countries, but also in a global, not only European sense. But in the Nordic countries also, we have a good tradition of working together. We could do more. I think we have small examples that we could develop even more. The Nordic list of authorized research publication channels that we work on together would be a good way of continuing. There is a small Nordic collaboration on health data we could contribute and work more to develop. All things that we could do more together and to maximize the effect of the research data.
More together, Jean-Claude.
Yeah, well, I think I can only share these hopes and visions. I personally think that in 10 years' time, most of what we said, as you indicated, Jonas, is fact of life. So real-time science publishing in all kinds of forms. I think citizen science and so forth will take up. And I think that in 10 years' time, we will say to each other, well, glad we did it, because now we are prepared for artificial intelligence. I really think the explosion that is coming there, we should really pay attention to it. It's much more than speaking robots. It's really impressive if you see what is going on. And it in essence means an explosion of data. Artificial intelligence is about huge volumes of data that intelligently, at least that part of it. So if we have created the open, transparent, accessible environment for data, it means that it will have created the open, transparent, and accessible environment for artificial intelligence on the one hand, and on the other hand, as I indicated with my own example, I also hope that in 10 years' time we will have scientists who have much more time because they get rid of all this stupid data crunching and gathering, that they have much more time to put the relevant questions on the table and think critically. And I think there is enough on the table to think about, so that whatever we can do together with AI to reduce the standardized parts of science, I think is a benefit. And that is most likely the long-term benefit of open science. So that goes way beyond Plan S, I would say.
Thank you. Sigrid, Jean-Claude, Jonas, thank you very much for participating in this panel. I think we should give them a big applause.